great weekend, actually. We're getting a bunch of snow up in the mountains.
Very cool. What do you normally do during the rainy and snowy season in your area?
My family and I like to get up in the mountains, and we do a lot of trail running and hiking. My son is 4 and my daughter is 2, and I'm going to try and get them on skis this winter. The principle is there, which is if kids aren't getting outside, they're not experiencing what hopefully a lot of us experienced when we were growing up. It's just the pleasure of being outside, being active, getting some fresh air, getting exercise, and just exploring around. We live right up on the base of Tiger Mountain out in Ciccone, Washington, and it provides a really easy opportunity for us to be on the trails in literally less than 5 minutes. And so he loves getting out there, and he's to the age now where he can carry his own small backpack and help me carry stuff for his little sister. I carry her and a little baby Bjorn in my front or my back, and then we go out for just a little bit with our dog, and usually ends up being a great day.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I've heard of that nature deficit disorder. It's amazing how things have got flipped around, and how some people are afraid to go out in the wilderness when there's actually more harm happening in society with regard to bad things that can get you or happen to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's funny because I'm looking actually at an article that I read last week, Tuesday, November 30th. The title is Head Out for a Daily Dose of Green Space. And you're exactly right. There's a quote in here where it says, many people are unfamiliar with the outdoors, they're scared to walk through a park, and they don't know what to do when they get there. And for someone that is passionate about, obviously, the outdoor industry and what we do here at Eddie Bauer and First Ascent, but just someone that's more passionate about getting outside. I grew up in suburban Chicago, and there weren't many mountains out there, but I was in a Boy Scout, and I went to summer camp every summer, and just really loved being outside as much as I could. And to hear that folks are scared to get outside, there's a role I think that we can all play, those of us that love it, just helping them experience that. There's nothing dangerous about it at all. It can be quite safe and obviously really enjoyable. Yeah, it's important for me and my family to get out and do that stuff.
Yeah, it's much like anything else. You take the necessary precautions and you prepare, but it's definitely nothing to be frightened over by any stretch.
Absolutely. And depending on what you're doing, there's always the sort of basics of, even on a little trail hike or a trek or something, of making sure you've got water and food and a backup layer or two, and making sure you tell folks where you're going, and you have a map or something equivalent. But it's certainly with a minimal amount of preparation, and for folks that are scared of that, just learning a little bit more about that stuff at their local gear shop or coming into one of our stores or reading about it online, there's really ways to prepare that can make it really enjoyable, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. I was in a shopping mall not too long ago, and I was more frightened there than I've ever been in the woods. In some ways, of course, you know what I mean? I wasn't in fear of my life or anything like that, but I feel much more comfortable out in the wilderness. I adapt wherever I'm at.
Yes, absolutely.
So how far are you from Mount Rainier?
We're about 2.5 hours or so. I think it's about 100 miles. I'm not quite sure. To get down there on a good day, I can usually do it in about 2 hours or so.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's great. I mean, like I said, I grew up in Chicago, and I've been out here for about 3 years, and I never ever get tired of seeing Rainier in the distance. And every morning I drive my son to school, and we go across the bridge on Mercer Island, over to Mercer Island, and we always look for it. And when it's out, it's just spectacular. It's a beautiful mountain, and quite challenging and technical, but just really awe-inspiring. It's great to be so close.
It's an outstanding wilderness area. Every time I go up there, I'm in awe and amazed, and there's just always something new I see, even if I'm at the same spot.
Yeah, that's right. It changes just like everything else. No climb is the same, no trek is the same. The conditions are obviously rarely the same. It's a pretty dynamic place. It's fun.
Yeah, I agree. Could you please share a little bit about Eddie Bauer history and how the First Ascent line came about?
Absolutely, yeah. So what a lot of folks don't know about Bauer is, one, he was a real guy. He was an excellent trapper, hunter, and fisherman, first and foremost. Those were his first loves. And the company was started back in 1920. And without going into a lot of detail, the short history of the company is that Eddie got into the outdoor business as a passion of his. He always said that my work was my hobby. And he was out 6, 8, 9 months a year doing as much as he possibly could, as much as he could really get away with in the context of trying to build his company. And his first real breakthrough was when he discovered down and the insulating qualities of down and patented the down jacket in 1936. The first he would go on to have for down outerwear. And it was because he almost froze to death on a fishing expedition where he was hypothermic. And the story goes that he was falling asleep, and that ice was actually caking up on the crown of his back. And his fishing buddy sort of awoke him and found him. And it was then that he knew he had to discover a more efficient way to keep him warm when he was outside doing what he loved to do. From then on, really, he started a sort of love affair with down garments and did a whole bunch of stuff in terms of outdoor outfitting. He outfitted the Army Air Corps and pilots in World War II. He had a relationship with the Army, also making sleeping bags for the infantrymen and other folks. And he developed this real loyal following of soldiers and folks that would come back from the war. And his label was stitched into those garments. And they would come back from Europe, and they would seek him out and say, Eddie Bauer, this guy that kept me warm while I was overseas, makes the best outerwear, and I have to have it. And so that started really the business. The legacy of Bauer is in outerwear. Sort of, it's the best category that we know how to do. And it led into the golden age of Himalayan mountaineering, as we like to call it. From about 53 to 83, we moved from general sort of outdoor outfitting to expedition outfitting. And outfitted, I think it was 14 famous first ascents, first American ascents, worldwide ascents, or route ascents, all over the top mountains in the Himalaya and throughout the world. So in 1953, we outfitted the first American expedition attempting to climb K2. And though they were unsuccessful, Eddie and the team worked real collaboratively to try and develop the lightest, warmest down jacket for that expedition. In 1963, Jim Whittaker summited Mount Everest as the first American to do so, outfitted in Bauer outerwear. And then from then on, scores of expeditions would go off into other places in the Himalaya, the Yukon, Alaska, and they wore Bauer down outerwear. The company then kind of took a little bit of a turn, frankly, in the mid-'80s, mid to late 80s, and lost its way a bit, and became a little bit more of a women's fashion brand. Not what we had been known for, not what we had been doing successfully for over 80 years, and sort of not really what the core of Eddie Bauer was. We lost our way 80s, early 90s, until about 2007 or so, when our new CEO, Neil Fisk, started. We were in decline, frankly, and what we've been trying to do over the last 3 years, and really this is the genesis of First Ascent, is to rebuild that dominant position that we once had in technical performance outerwear. And that's where First Ascent comes from. What we're trying to do is develop the best gear in the world for some of the best mountain guides in the world on the expeditions, to outfit them on expeditions that they go on. And that is the thrust of the company now and forever forward, is trying to reclaim the heritage that we sort of proudly had and abandoned for a little bit. Everything that we do now is focused on that goal. We like to say around here that, before there was Patagonia and North Face and Arc'teryx and Marmot and everybody else, exceptional sure, there was Eddie Bauer, and we believe that there's a certain birthright that we have to the notion of technical expedition outerwear. We just really have to go and prove back to the customer that it's in our DNA and our heritage and that we're back again.
Well, it's very fascinating and interesting. I don't think a lot of people really know about this long history of Eddie Bauer. And I think, as you mentioned, there was a little bit of maybe getting off focus there for a while. I think a lot of businesses end up doing that sort of thing. Maybe they follow market trends or something and get away from their root goal. And then sometime maybe somebody says, hey, we've gotten away from what we're all about. Let's snap back because that's what we do best.
That's exactly right, and I'll be candid. Before I started working at Bauer a few years ago, I hadn't been in an Eddie Bauer store for probably 10 or 12 years. The products didn't really speak to me. As a guy that likes to get outside, it wasn't really the sort of lifestyle that I was leading in terms of the products that they were selling. And I think you're right. I don't think a lot of customers have any idea about the rich heritage of Bauer. I certainly did not. And yet, the more that you read about it, the more you hear about it, obviously I'm biased because I work here, but there are really, really exceptional stories of guys and gals doing really phenomenal things. I mean, some of the explorations that happened and some of the expeditions that we outfitted, some of the people that we were associated with, obviously way before my time, are fascinating. And these are people that push up just exploration, doing things that have never been done before. It's a pretty remarkable history when you really dig into it. And one of our jobs really is to share that with folks. I think that people really like stories. And they especially like stories of great adventure where folks had the courage to go into the unknown and try something that had never been done, and we want to support that. And we've got a lot of programs that help support people doing that internally that we started and sharing those externally, and obviously the focus of our guide team and working with them to develop products. One of the things we really feel passionately about is that we like working with guides because guides help people get outside. They're approachable, they work with people, they help them overcome things that they didn't think they could do, and simply like we were talking about before, if someone could show up at the bottom of Mount Rainier in flip-flops and a t-shirt, we could outfit them. If they were in good physical condition and were mentally prepared, they could join one of our guides and they could climb Mount Rainier. It's a really exceptional experience. We feel really proud to be able to do that and share that with somebody.
If you don't mind, can you throw out a few of the names? You mentioned such a heritage of different people that Eddie Bauer's been connected with as a company.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our guide team immediately. It's anchored fundamentally by sort of the founding 6 or 7 people. Among them, Ed Beesters, who is obviously sort of America's preeminent, legendary high-altitude mountaineer. He's the only American to climb all 8,000-meter peaks, 14 8,000-meter peaks, without the use of supplemental oxygen. He lives here in Bainbridge Island. There's a gentleman named Dave Hahn, and Dave Hahn has climbed Everest 12 times. I think he's had 15 expeditions. He's also summited Mount Vinson, which is the highest point in Antarctica, several dozen times, as well as Denali, obviously out in Alaska, I think 20 or 25 times or so. I'm not exactly sure of the numbers, but certainly Dave is a legend in high-altitude mountaineering because of his guiding work on Everest, but also a very great guy that helps people reach the summits of those other epic mountains as well. Peter Whitaker is our third sort of elder statesman, if you will, a guy that really sort of grew up in an American family of mountaineers. Jim obviously summited Everest as the first American. His father Lou started RMI, which is the largest guiding, and Peter sort of continues to carry that mantle as the current owner of RMI and Whitaker Mountaineering. And then we have a group of up-and-coming folks that we like to call sort of a little bit younger crowd, 3 people. Chad Keel, who is a specialist in ice guiding and ice climbing, as well as obviously a mountain guide. He lives in Colorado. Seth Waterfall, who has been to the summit of Everest, I think twice now, and also guides all over the world. He's been to the Caucasus in Russia. He's been other places. He also guides up Denali. And then Melissa Arnott. And Melissa is the only American woman to summit Everest 3 times successfully. She likely will be going back in the spring. Not quite sure of her plans yet, but she is a real treasure in American mountaineering and the lead anchor of our female guide team. Jake Norton is our expedition photographer and also really accomplished high-altitude mountaineer. 3 summits of Everest, I think, and a couple more expeditions. And then a woman named Caroline George, who is a recent addition to our team, is also a fantastic ice climber. And so those might not all be household names for sure. I think Ed probably is, and potentially Dave for those people who are really into this kind of thing, and Peter. But the other younger guide team are really phenomenal because they provide a great balance of the older and the younger views on gear and technology and climbing style and everything else. It's a really good mix that we have on our team.
There's definitely a group of people there that know something about what it means to stay warm on the mountains and out in the cold weather. So I know a lot of that expertise comes into play with putting the line together that we'll be discussing.
Indeed, that's right. And what I would say with that is, I think a lot of companies talk about this, and I don't have any direct experience working for any of the other folks in the industry, but we take it very, very seriously, to the point where every single guide has veto power over any product. And if they don't feel that it's ready for market, if they're not comfortable with it, if they don't think it's going to perform, if they're not happy with the functionality, the fit, or anything about it, they can nix it. They can say, you know what, Andrew or Eddie Bauer or anybody else, it's not ready. And I'm not ready to sign my name to this, which we literally ask them to do on their hang tags. It seems sort of like an afterthought potentially to some folks when you're looking at it, but their signature on that tag literally means that they've signed off on the product. And as an Ciccone on the sort of return to Everest expedition, as we called it, and we put a lot of time and energy into it. We had several prototypes. The team brought it to Everest. They got up to Camp 2, and they didn't feel comfortable bringing it past Camp 2 up to Camp 3 and Camp 4. We had made that tent. We were sourcing that tent. We had liable fabric and poles and everything else against that tent, and we scrapped it because they weren't ready to go. And that's just a level of commitment that we owe these guys to make sure that if they're going to put in the time to really build the gear they need to stay dry and warm and as comfortable as you can possibly be in some of these conditions, that we're going to stand by them and let them know that if it's not ready, it's not ready. That's really something we take real seriously around here.
Yeah, that's great, because I know all of us have experience with products that we feel like should have been stopped somewhere in the process and went to market anyway.
Someone asked me one time, they said, well, you say guide built. That's how we talk about it around here. The guide built process is paramount to everything we do. And a gentleman asked me one time, well, how does that show up in product? And I thought that was a really great question, and I'll give you an example. Because it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to say that all of that feedback directly impacts what you do on a daily basis. They're not just signing off on something that I or designer came up with, they're actually influencing the construction of all these garments. And real quick example is we have a jacket called the Peak 15 down jacket. It's our warmest, puffiest 850 fill jacket, and you could wear it in lieu of a down suit to the summit. I think most folks probably prefer a suit for various reasons. But the guides always talk about when their clients on Rainier were getting cold at 12,000 feet at the top of Disappointment Cleaver, for example, or at high break just below the summit. and the winds could be 40, 50 miles an hour. It's sub-zero temperatures. Their hands are freezing. They've stopped moving. They're sweaty. They're clearly cooling down. The guys immediately ask all the clients to pull this big puffy out of their jacket, put it over all their layers, zip it up, get the hood over their head, and lock in all of their body heat so they stay warm. And they said a lot of companies will put this draft tube on the outside of the jacket. And what ends up happening is that the clients, when they're cold and tired and they're trying to fumble around with their gloves, end up getting the zipper caught in that draft tube. And so we left that off. We said, you know what, it has to have a big, chunky, functional gear for a client or a guy in a situation like that to get themselves zipped up and warmed up. And that's sort of the most explosive example I have of just how seriously we take what they do and then bring that all the way down into product development.
I guess it goes without saying that probably the majority of listeners are not going to summit Everest. And so what we can take out of this, I think, for a lot of people is that if people are in such extreme conditions, then we can feel a little bit more assured that they're going to work in the types of trails and conditions that we frequent when we go out and experience the outdoors.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We know that we're building this stuff for incredibly harsh conditions that 99% of our customers, including myself, may never encounter. But for the folks that do have that desire to go out and explore the unknown and to get into situations that could be certainly dangerous and cold or wet or whatever, we want to make sure that we can outfit them and provide them with the gear that performs. And that's the standard to which we try and build all of our stuff. Sometimes we get it 100% right. Sometimes we obviously have room for improvement, but the standard is always to be good. And that's what we're shooting for every day.
So I want to zero in on a few of the first ascent insulation items, but I think it would be a good idea to first go over the concept and practice of layering. Do you mind giving a brief overview of layering?
Sure, absolutely. In general, we think about layering in terms of three basic layers, if you will. There is the first layer, sometimes folks call it a base layer, which is a layer that you put against your skin. And the fundamental goal of that layer is to keep you warm by wicking moisture and sweat away from your body and then drying quickly. If your core is cold and wet, your body has a real hard time warming up. So the first layer is a moisture management layer, we say, and secondarily, it's an insulation layer. The second layer, we think, is once you have that base layer on, you need some insulation if you're in a cold area. And that insulation can come in the form of a shell jacket that will keep you dry in a wet situation, or it can come in synthetic insulation jacket like Primor, a down jacket, lightweight down jacket, or a fleece jacket. The primary goal of that is breathability if you're working hard outside and you're sweating. You want to make sure that you get it away from your skin, and then you allow that sweat to evaporate through that second layer if you're doing anything that's aerobic. And then the third layer is usually one where the goal is protection. Protection from water, in case of a waterproof jacket, protection from extreme cold, like a big puffy parka, or somewhere in between potentially with a soft shell jacket that gives you a little bit of water protection but a lot of breathability so that if you're really working hard, you don't wet out from the inside of your garments, you can let that perspiration evaporate through the fabric and kind of escape outside. And so layering at its core, really the principles of those three layers is to provide you an adaptable system depending on what you're doing. And so you could be in one of those base layers, for example, climbing Rainier. You'll leave the parking lot in a base layer if it's sunny out, and you'll hike all the way up to the tip, you're at 10,000 feet, and may never take out that base layer. When you then go for the summit the next day, you'll have an insulating layer, you'll have a shell jacket to keep you warm from the wind and the rain if it's out there or the snow, and then a big puffy parka over that. So layering fundamentally is an adaptable system that allows you to change your clothing depending on the conditions as they're changing.
Okay, so let's hit the down versus synthetic issue with regard to clothing before we go into some specific items. Many of us know that down can provide more warmth to weight, great compression, but it may not be the best option for very wet conditions. How do you determine if you're going to opt for a down product like the down light sweater or vest or a synthetic insulation layer for a particular trip?
The way I think about it is exactly what you just said. The conventional wisdom, which I think is generally accurate, is that if you're going to be in a wet and damp environment where there's a high chance of either excessive rain or just some condition where even if it's not raining, you're going to be damp and wet, synthetic insulation tends to be better because when down gets wet, it loses its insulating value. If you're going to be in a very cold, a very dry environment, like Alaska, for example, or even the Rocky Mountains, Colorado, etc., where you tend to get a lot more sunshine and less rain than in the Pacific Northwest, then down is usually a better option because there's no real threat of it getting wet and losing its insulating value, and like you said, it's extremely practical and lightweight that's ever been developed. So I just think about generally where I'm going, and if I am not quite sure which to bring, I make sure that if I'm going to bring a down jacket, that I always have some sort of waterproof layer with me, just in general because it's good practice, but also just to make sure that you have it so that you protect your down from getting wet. All of our jackets where we have down in them have CWR finish on the outside, which is durable water repellent, that will shed light, wind, and rain, and snow. But if you're in a really damp downpour and you can't get inside in a hut or something like that, it's probably better to go with synthetic insulation.
I recently tried the downlight vest, and I just love it because there's times when I need a little bit of insulation on my chest, but I don't need it so much on my arms. I need those to breathe a little bit more to keep from overheating and sweating. And so, I'll put that on, like you said, in a dry condition. But if I know that things are just going to be just saturated, drenched, then I usually opt for some of the synthetic type options or something that handles moisture a little bit better.
That's exactly right. And what I will say is I've done this before. It's potentially maybe it's not necessarily the lightest approach per se, but there's certainly been positions where I brought both. I brought a lightweight synthetic insulation layer, and then because down becomes so light and so packable and so easy to work with, I brought it along. I brought a downlight sweater. Actually, we have a downlight hoodie pullover that I brought along in a couple climbs. It's almost backup emergency layer if I'm really cold. If I find myself in an emergency or situation where I need even more warmth than what I've got, I keep that in the bottom of my pack. And sometimes I never use it, but I like knowing it's there, and it's so lightweight and packable, like you said with the downlight vest, that it's just insurance, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, I can definitely see there's some trips where maybe you're not going as far, like long distance hiking, and you could opt to bring another clothing option or insulation option. You may not be carrying as much water because it's readily available all around in the form of snow, or you may not have as much food. You just kind of weigh it all out in your mind and what type of trip and what the conditions are. I know that I tend to prefer The first ascent insulation products that I'd like to discuss all contain Timelapsed 1 synthetic insulation. Would you tell me what you know about Timelapsed 1?
Sure. Timelapse is the preferred synthetic insulation that we use for all of our first ascent products. There are other products out there that Timelapse offers, and Timelapse 1 is advertised, and we believe is the highest performing insulation that Timelapse offers on the market for warmth and water resistance, and also for softness and compressibility. It's an ultra-fine microfiber insulation, and it stays warmer when it gets wet and dry than all the other insulations that are out there. Now, Timelapse makes other products that are very good. Timelapse Sport, Timelapse Eco, Timelapse Infinity, some other ones. We found in our testing with our guide teams that Timelapse 1 is the highest performing of their products, and so we use that first ascent.
Yeah, and it has nearly the same thermal performance when it's wet as it does when it's dry. Is that correct?
That's correct. I believe that it's about the same, which is remarkable. And there's actually a test I've seen, I've actually done it myself, where if you can imagine two cylinders, and one has, let's call it a half a cup of water in it, and the other is empty, and you sandwich a piece of Timelapse 1 insulation between those two cylinders, if you then flip the cup over, the water will literally rest right on top of the insulation. It won't go through. It's remarkable. And we're not talking about insulation that is sheeted, porous. It's just so tightly wound, and they've done something with, obviously, this is the magic sauce that they have, where it can keep you warm, and it can repel all that water, and when it gets wet, it dries, and keeps its loft amazingly well.
Yeah, I've seen a test where they'll take the insulation itself and have somebody close their eyes and stand with their hands out parallel to the floor, and then they will set a piece of the insulation in one of their hands, and while their eyes are closed, ask them which hand it's in. And it's so light that you can't really tell, but if you wait just a few more seconds, you'll begin to understand which hand's in, because it'll warm up considerably. And I've actually done that with family and friends, and was able to spoof all of them except for one who actually let it sit there long enough for it to warm the hand up.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I've done that exact same test. We take this stuff very seriously, and it's remarkable. I've been really impressed with their products. And the ultimate test for all of us is wear testing in the field. And I can tell you categorically it performs. We wouldn't run it, and we wouldn't be happy with it if our guide team didn't get out there and tell us everything that you're seeing in your office and you're reading about and the company is advertising is indeed true. And we've been exceptionally impressed with Timelapse, and they're a great partner for us.
Three of the products that are in the first ascent line that I'd like to talk about specifically are the Igniter jacket, the Serrano jacket, and the Igniter pants. Let's start with the Igniter jacket, and that's made, as I understand, for both men and women. Could you go over some of the features of that?
It is indeed, yep. The Igniter jacket is it's a 100-gram Timelapse 1 insulation. We advertise it as the synthetic belay jacket that our guides use when they're guiding on mountain here. It may be a little light, candidly, for some of the clients that climb. They prefer a big, heavier, puffy-down jacket, but some of the guys that are used to doing this and are maybe a little bit more comfortable in the cold, or at least deal with it better, this is the jacket that they use. It's very minimalist. I'm actually looking at mine right now. I wore it to work today. It's on the ground. It's got two hand pockets. It's got an external chest pocket. It's got an internal pocket that can hold a MP3 player with a little portal, and then it's got a hood that fits comfortably over your helmet. That's pretty. We built it around that weight purposely and wanted to keep it nice and light and not over-constructed. And so it's a great sort of workhorse piece. And I can tell you, being in the Pacific Northwest, it doesn't really get that cold here. Maybe, every once in a while it dips into the 30s, and I can wear this jacket all through winter without a problem. And it's really the only jacket I need.
For women, it's black or dark plum, and then for men, black or blue. I see.
Black or scent blue, that's exactly right. And it's a great value. And this is a jacket I think that folks will have, like most of our gear, for quite a while. We say that people will have the jacket until they're tired of the color and want to buy a different one, because we try to engineer them such that they'll last you literally for the rest of your life. That's the standard that Eddie had when he started the company back in 1920, and that's the standard we can still try and uphold today.
And it's a little over a pound depending on the size and gender, but as I see it, there's no extraneous features. The fact that it's overnight in the 20s during the day there. I took the Serrano jacket out in that, and I do run a little hot than maybe some people. From torso on up, I tend to get overheated pretty easily, but I had that on in, I'd say, probably an average of around 20 to 22 degrees, somewhere in there. And the only thing that got cold in my body was where I wasn't really wearing enough, but I didn't get cold there, and I didn't have a shell on over it. And the wind was moving a little bit. It wasn't extreme, but enough to know that it was definitely blowing in my face. And when I was done on my trip and I went indoors, I had taken it off, laid it over my arm, and while I was walking around, I went to switch it to put it on another arm, and I looked down and my arm was drenched from just laying on there because of the warmth that it was providing that wasn't needed at the time because I was indoors.
Yeah.
So it's amazing, and I didn't have any problem with that outside, of course, because it was doing its job and I wasn't overheated or anything.
It's a great piece, and what I'll say is there's different pieces in this space, if you will. The Serrano is made from a 60-gram Timelapse 1 insulation, so it's not quite half the insulating value, if you will, of the Igniter jacket, but it's close. We've incorporated some details that are a little bit different that make this a more versatile piece in terms of its application potentially to more aerobic pursuits. I think the Igniter is suited well for things where you're going to be cold and relatively stationary. You just need to stay warm. We have Polartec power stretch side panels down the side of this jacket. There's no hood, and it's cut pretty trim. And I think that what we were trying to accomplish with this is a nice, very close to body insulation layer that layers quite well, is not bulky at all, is very baggy, that keeps you warm, and yet provides a certain amount of breathability if you're on the go and doing things that are active. And so for cold weather running, I run kind of hot too as well, so I might overheat. But for some folks that run a little colder, cold weather running or skate skiing or sort of stop and go hiking and trekking in the wintertime, those side panels on the side, those stretch panels, will allow a lot of moisture and sweat out. And then without the hood on there as well, you can have a hat on, you can be real light and fast. There's internal wrist gaiters, we call them, that also sort of allow you to keep the tops of your fingers and your palms warm. Folks for ice climbing like that, because it goes under their gloves real easily and keeps their hands warm when they're working with leashless tools and other things. It's a very interesting and very specific piece that we think a lot of folks can find a lot of different uses for, and it's one of our favorites when we're guiding.
Yeah, it's definitely great for the winter hiker, backpacker who's maybe snowshoeing, cross-country skiing type. I think something that's on the move. I found it to work really well for me, and that comes in for both men and women, and then the colors black and coffee, it looks like, for women, and black and blue and red for men.
Correct, yeah, it's an Adriatic blue and a redwood color, gritted colors for men. It's a great piece. One of the things you were talking about for folks that are doing cold weather backpacking and other things is I brought this jacket to Aconcagua on an expedition that we went on with our guide teams, and I loved it because it was warmer than a fleece. It didn't breathe quite as well as a fleece, but it was so packable. And because the external shell is sort of just a slick nylon, it repels just enough water. It was very easy to bring on and off. It didn't get bunched up on my base layers. I didn't have a base layer on top of a fleece jacket. Sometimes that can get kind of bunchy in your arms. It was a real easy piece for me to be able to wear and get in and out of as temperatures changed. As well as I would sleep in this piece at night, kind of like you were talking about before. It was great inside my sleeping bag. It's just an extra measure of warmth as we got up to the high camp. With a hat on, in a bag, I felt, just a down bag, I was totally warm. And it was really nice to just know that you could go to a place where you could get warm after a hard day being outside when it got cold.
Yeah, it's definitely extremely comfortable. I mean, it feels just like down to me, and I think most would be just as comfortable in it in terms of its loft and soft.
Indeed, yeah. And I think there are probably more similarities between down and Primaloft than there are dissimilarities. I think that when you get into the extremes, when you talk about insulation sailing, and obviously we have a bias towards down outerwear because it's sort of what we do, and we grew up with that. Eddie invented the down jacket. We invented really the first down sweater back in 1954, and it's something in our heritage. And yet some people are allergic to down, or they don't like down, or they like synthetic insulation substitutes, and some of it comes down to personal preference. And that's why we carry both in the first design line, to make sure that we're offering people the piece they need for what they want to do.
Certainly. So the Igniter pants, these are for men only. Do you have a women's version on the horizon, or is there something else that you recommend currently before we get into the Igniter pants?
We did have the women's Igniter pant. We sold out, and we probably should have made more, quite honestly, because the Igniter pant is an interesting piece where we developed it for a very specific application, which is basically a base camp insulating pant and or a supplement to very, very cold summit days where soft shell climbing pant and base layer alone won't get it done. And we had it for women's, and we're sold out now. We do have plans to continue to run the Igniter pant for fall 11, which will be kind of coming up. And in the meantime, I know it's not perfect, but some women can fit into a men's small, and it's not perfect, obviously, but in terms of this being a real technical climbing pant, it's more of an insulating sort of base camp and very cold day summit pant, and so I think it can be a little bit more forgiving in the pant. Obviously, we don't like to ask women to wear men's stuff. I think that they're asked to do that by the brands, and maybe some women do that. We take it very seriously with Melissa and Caroline and some of the other women on our guide team that we engineer product for women to wear in the outdoors specifically for them. There's this line I love that the industry has called shrink it and pink it, where you basically just take the men's style and shorten it a little bit, take the sides in a little bit, throw it in a bright pink color. We don't do that. Everything we build is from scratch. So stay tuned for the Igniter pants to sort of come back in line once we get some more from our factory partners.
Great. These are also the 100-gram insulation.
Exactly. If you, I called it the Primaloft tuxedo when I was in Arctic Cargo. I had the pants and the jacket between the Serrano and the Igniter pants. That's what I would wear at dinner. Even when it was sunny out, when we were up at 14 in the 19,000 feet, it got cold. And so sit around and eat dinner and drink your hot drinks in the Primaloft tuxedo.
And the outer fabric on all these first descent pieces that we've been talking about is that 20D ripstop nylon, so we're not talking about a coarse...
Slide on and off really quickly. They're soft, they're packable, they're very compressible. It fits with the entire tenor of the garment. If we were to take really lightweight insulation, synthetic insulation, and put a big, heavy, burly fabric over it, the design logic wouldn't seem right to us in our guide team. They wouldn't get it. If you're going to go with a big, burly fabric, you probably go and you're engineering more of kind of a parka, just to stand around and wear around in maybe more of a sort of commuter environment or just a less active environment. These are really built for people that are on the go, that have a premium on weight and performance.
And there's nearly full side zips on these.
Yep, we call them sort of a 7/8 side zip, which is it almost comes all the way up. The idea is to be able to give you very easy access over any kind of boot. Climbing boot, certainly a ski touring boot, to the extent that you're doing that in very cold conditions, anything. You leave them unzipped in your pack, at least I recommend doing that, and then if you get to a situation where you need these, you pull them out, the zips are already undone, you easily slide your legs right in, and you zip the zips down, and you're ready to go.
And there's a little bit extra fabric on the seat and the knees for reinforcement.
That's correct. On the seat and the knees, it's a little bit more durable fabric, and that is basically just for high abrasion areas, especially around base camp where there can be rocks and other things you may be scraping up against, just to make sure that the life of the product holds up when you're around camp and you're on your knees, either starting your stove or setting up camp or getting your gear sorted. We think it provides a little bit more protection. And we didn't do it all over to try and make sure it was as light and packable as possible, but in that high abrasion area of the knees and seat, we did reinforce that.
Okay, and these come in black?
Come in black, yeah, pretty standard, and they're a great piece. We got a lot of folks that are doing winter ice fishing or winter sledding. Not sort of just like pedestrian sledding, but adventure sledding, cross-country sled, sled touring, I guess. I don't do that personally, but we've had requests from interesting folks up in northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, southern Canada, right along the border there, where it can get pretty darn cold, and these folks like having these. As you're active and inactive, it goes back and forth. And so for someone that's just going outside to stand around and do something outside where it just needs to be warm, these are a great choice. But as backups, and even as emergency pieces, if you're in really cold weather backpacking, and maybe your plan is to get into camp and be on the go and set up camp and then dive right into your bag, they're light enough, and certainly depending on the conditions you're in, that to bring them as a backup in case you have an emergency situation, or you just need a little extra warmth because you can get quite cold. These are a great option for that. And so the folks that are into cold weather backpacking, I think, have really responded well to these pants as well.
I like the ability to be able to unzip the sides even for ventilation at times. If I get a little bit warmer for whatever reason, I can let a little bit more air in, ventilate a little bit. It's just a little bit more of a way for me to regulate my body temperature.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and those side zips are handy so that you can do that. And they're nice and long. I mean, the last thing that you want to do is you're going to have a zip on there, and for whatever reason it's not helpful, or it impedes your ability to do something like ventilate, or get your foot in there with a boot on or something else. We figured if you ran it all the way up the side, it has the most flexibility. And we didn't come all the way up, so it wasn't on your hip bone when you're wearing a pack if you're using that in that situation. And also that you didn't have to worry about it coming undone, so that then reattaching it sort of awkwardly from the top, sometimes that can be a little bit of a problem as well. So we came almost to the top. So you'll see that same thing on our Rainier Storm Shell pants, which is our hard shell waterproof pants, same logic.
Yeah, if it dips down a little colder than expected for whatever reason, I like to be able to slip these on, under my quilter and my sleeping bag to give me a little bit extra warmth. And again, I can unzip them a little bit if need be. I don't feel the zipper, so there's no problem there. And very versatile for me. I think it's outstanding. I know that there are lighter options that people can get, and I'd say that some of them that I looked at again are because they have less insulation, and some of them may not have the zippers and things like this. But I think most of us who have been out and done any type of expedition type backpacking or just winter sports and activities in general out there understand what it's like to try to get in and out of things with boots and all of that without getting wet and so forth. So this makes it very versatile.
Yeah, absolutely. And make it easy for people to really love their gear and to have it work with them and not fight their gear. That's really what you want when you're out there. You want to be focusing on having a good time. You want to be focusing on potentially the very serious thing that you're doing. If you're climbing, you need to be paying attention to things, and especially if you're in rainier and crevasse areas and other things with high hazards, avalanche danger, etc. You need to be dialed in to what's happening. And if you're not fussing with your gear, that's good. You should be focusing on what you're doing and then enjoying the success of an expedition or a job well done afterwards. The minute you start worrying about zippers and poles and things fighting against you, you're not concentrating on, at a minimum, just having a good time. And at its most extreme, making sure that you're really paying attention to what you're doing if you're in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, there's other products in the First Ascent line. Obviously, it goes much wider than just synthetic insulation options. Would you briefly share a little bit about the other products in this line?
Sure, absolutely. I'll try and be brief. We basically architected it the same way we talked about with our layering system. And so, at its most basic, we have an entire spectrum of base layer products against the skin moisture management layers in different silhouettes, quarter zips, crews, different weights, mid-weight, expedition weight, that provide that first measure of warmth and protection for moisture management against your skin. Then we have a whole complement of insulating layers. We have fleece layers, different weights of fleece, cloud layer fleece, 100 weight. We have two 200 weight fleeces, the hang fire hoodie, which has a hood, and a point success jacket, which is a Polar Tech Wind Pro product. We obviously have the synthetic insulating layers we talked about in terms of the Serrano jacket and the Igniter jacket. And then we have a bunch of down options. We have our downlight sweater and vest, which really are the modern interpretation of the down sweater that we invented back in the 1950s. We have a mountain guide down jacket, which is a little bit heavier, a little bit warmer, a little bit more down insulation in it with abrasion resistant shoulders, and a great sort of base camp coat as well as just general purpose cold weather coat. We have a Peak 15 jacket that is our burliest, not heaviest, but certainly our warmest down jacket. And then sort of the outer shell layer before you get into heavy insulation when it gets really cold. A mountain guide jacket, front point jacket, which are our two soft shell offerings. And then two hard shell jackets, the Rainier Storm Shell and the BC200. And the BC200 is a product we're really excited about. It's a 3-layer garment. It's a 2025 for those of your fans that know what that is. It's really high levels of waterproof protection and breathability in one package. Extremely lightweight, under 11 ounces. We also have some accessories. We have socks, and we have hats, and we have buffs, and we have some other stuff. But that really is the essence of the First Ascent Alpine line. And then we also have a small ski capsule, if you will, built for people that are skiing big mountains up in Alaska. We have an entire ski guide team that we can go into. I won't do that right now. And then pieces that are more sort of free ride appropriate for folks that are doing things either in the backcountry or resort skiing and just venturing into these things in terms of the whole free ride thing that's going on right now. We have jackets and pants, actually a bib and a jacket and pants in our first descent series. That's kind of what we call our ski line. So that's just a quick snapshot. But I think what you'll find is it's very well edited to have a few pieces in each different category. Only what you need for a couple of very specific things, but on balance, the entire assortment allows you to mix and match a lot of different options to satisfy a whole wide array of adventures that folks might be going on. And we think that with all this stuff, we try not to have a lot of choice for people so that they're overwhelmed. We try and engineer things that are perfectly suited for a couple of different activities, and then allow people to put together their own system depending on where they're going.
Great, that's a fascinating line. Looking into a little bit more of that. I encourage listeners to get on the Eddie Bauer email list too. I've seen some great deals come through that.
Yeah, please do. You can visit our site, and I know that there's an opportunity in there, kind of at the bottom of the page, to sign up for email. Visit the site, browse around, and certainly if you have any feedback or questions, get in touch with us. You can call customer service, you can email us, and certainly we'll try and make sure that we're answering your questions, and if we can encourage you to try stuff.
Anything else you'd like to add before we go?
The one thing I would say, back to the very beginning of our discussion, is that I think a lot of people are skeptical about Eddie Bauer, and potentially even First Ascent. And I say that candidly, just so that your listeners know that we're in this for the long haul. We take this very seriously. We're doing this with a team of world-class athletes and guides. These are some of the folks that are at the top of their game. They're outside in the mountains hundreds of days a year, and collectively have decades of experience doing this. Give it a shot. Have a look at it. I think you'll be very impressed with the quality, with the thoughtfulness of the gear, and I think that for folks that are interested in exploring a new line that we think really has something differentiated to bring to the market, I would have a look at it. I can tell you my own personal story with this sort of reconnection with Eddie Bauer is one of a real fascination of what this man built and some of the things that he did, and we're trying to reclaim that and honor that legacy. And so I really encourage folks to sign up for email, hop into one of our stores, look online, and if you have any questions and we can be of any service in helping you try this stuff out, I really think you'll be satisfied when you get the product. I know hundreds of people have, and our guide team obviously stands behind everything that we do. So have a look. I think folks will be quite impressed.
Cool. Andrew, it's been great talking with you. I'll be sure to put a special link to the First Ascent website on the Practical Backpacking podcast site.
Fantastic. Thanks for the call today, and I really enjoyed speaking with you and all the listeners as well. I hope this was a great session for them. I had a lot of fun.
Very welcome. I did too. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. The Practical Backpacking Podcast is financially supported by its host and a few kind listeners. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to show your support, please visit practicalbackpacking.com to donate and access other practical backpacking services. This podcast is copyright 2010 by Practical Backpacking. All rights reserved.
Welcome to the Practical Backpacking Podcast.
This is episode 49, and I'm Bernie Wilt. In this episode, I interview Ami Borenstein, the Director of Design and Development for Outdoor Research. Ami answers use-specific questions regarding the company's wide-ranging line of gloves and mittens. He provides thorough details regarding the technical materials included in various handwear models for protecting the hands in a variety of wilderness situations. Here's my conversation with Ami Borenstein.
Hi, this is Ami.
Ami, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Great. You having a good day?
Having a great day. Sun's finally peeking through the clouds a little bit here in Seattle.
Yeah, it's just been pouring down rain here for quite a while. There's flooding in the area. In fact, we even had a tornado in the area.
That's
much?
Yeah, I actually do quite a bit of downhill skiing, but for many, many years I spent days on end doing winter camping up in the Washington Cascades right near here.
Yeah, that's a great proving ground, isn't it?
Oh, for just about everything.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, the reason some of the best mountaineers in the world come from this region and so many outdoor companies are in this region is because the mountains are our playground in our backyard.
Definitely. But I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite some time about gloves and mittens. I believe it's a topic that's often taken for granted.
I agree.
Let's start with some basic fundamentals. Would you explain, perhaps the obvious, why the hands get cold and just how important it is to have proper handwear?
Absolutely. The main reason the hands get cold is because the human body naturally wants to draw warmth to its core to preserve its core in urgent situations. So that means toes, tip of nose, ears, and things. That's the main reason that hands get cold. The good news is there's a tremendous range of handwear to address a variety of needs out there that can ensure that any type of need or metabolism, weather situation, or sport activity is addressed.
I've seen people who have lost their tips of their ears, their nose, and fingers, and it's not pretty. And I've also seen how more than a few complain of wet, cold hands despite wearing gloves and mittens. So there appears to be quite a few that don't know precisely what to wear and when to wear them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's kind of two issues. One is education around what to wear, exactly as you indicated. And I think it's also that there's a lot of, very basic product out on the market. And I think oftentimes people take for granted how important a very high quality, high performance pair of gloves is. So they tend to buy something that's a little lower cost. And if they're going to be out for any length of time, that can be a decision you end up regretting.
Yeah, that's for sure. But many of us know that mittens can keep your hands a little warmer than some gloves because the fingers are not separated with mittens and allow the fingers to warm each other. What do you recommend in this respect? Like, how do you decide whether to wear gloves or mittens?
It's definitely a challenging decision. I mean, at the most basic level, what I suggest to users is if you know you probably won't need your fingers too much, low dexterity types of activities. So I think of snowshoeing, I think of downhill skiing, I think of backpacking even. When you really know that you're not going to need your fingers that often, a mitten is absolutely the preferable choice to maintain warmth. However, oftentimes people do need use of their fingers during their sport activity. And so for that type of use, definitely a glove is going to be the better choice just because it provides you that 5-finger access. And particularly if it's extreme cold situations, if you're doing some backpacking and you're on a trail and you have mittens on and you want to, adjust a strap or get a drink. But in extreme cold situations, it's a different calculation because you can't even take your gloves off for a minute. So you have to make sure that you're using the right product, which in many cases would be a glove, because then you can do the things you need to do without removal of your handwear items.
Yeah, I've definitely been in situations where taking off my gloves was an absolute no-no. I mean, just immediately you get burned from the cold.
Yep.
So how does this factor in? I've seen products on the market that actually have glove liners inside of mittens.
That's actually a great direction because it gives you several different things. One, it gives you a tremendous amount of versatility. Sometimes you need the warmth of a mitt, other times you need the dexterity of a glove. When you begin to put those two things together, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So again, coming to ice fishing point of view or a backpacking point of view, you may want to stop for a moment. You need that dexterity of your fingers. Well, then you can pull that mitten out or off and use your fingers to accomplish that discrete task without ever exposing your hands to the extreme cold weather. And then when you're done, you put that mitt cover back on and warm everything right back up.
Many gloves are reinforced with leather or synthetic material. Would you explain the practical difference between these two with regard to how they handle moisture, say, wear and abrasion, and cold?
Sure. And I would even go one step further and break down synthetics into some that are sort of very high durability and others that are slightly lower durability. So let's say we call it 3 types of palm material. So first is leather that I think everyone's familiar with. Very supple, very tactile, very dexterous, quite durable, and actually probably in many respects the best material to make a glove palm out of. The one weak link is it is skin, and therefore it does take up moisture. So that can result in a pretty hazardous situation if you're in prolonged outdoor activity and you're going through melt-freeze cycles. Those things can take on quite a bit of moisture and really reduce their insulation value, and even in some cases end up freezing stiff as a board. Competitive melt-freeze cycles are not going to take on that moisture and have some of the challenges with leather. Some of the more supple ones give you very, very nice friction, but they compromise in the form of durability. And those, again, they have their benefits on lighter duty gloves because they make it very, very easy to operate. Take out your water bottle, operate straps on a backpack, even take pictures with a camera because they give you that nice friction element. Others are going to be a little bit stiffer. One that we use is a proprietary product we call Alpha Grip. And the nice thing about that, even though it is stiffer, is it's extremely durable with some friction coefficient. So really, I guess as a big picture, leather is a great product. I highly recommend it to a lot of people. Careful with leather in high moisture environments. Synthetics are great, but take a close look at the synthetics you're using and make sure you pick the right one for your type of activity.
With regard to the Alpen grip, does that have a breakdown period or something? You know how leather will soften up a little bit. Does that occur with regard to the stiffness of Alpen grip?
The amazing thing about Alpen grip is it is massively stable through a range of conditions and through its lifespan. So I guess the short answer would be no, that it doesn't break down, doesn't break in. The longer answer would be I was in Antarctica, where you obviously need gloves a couple of years ago, and one of the guides there was using a pair of outdoor research red gloves, which we make with Alpen grip palm, and he had used those at that point probably about 250 days, and ultimately sent them back to me with about 350 days worth of use as a guide in Antarctica, and the Alpen grip showed very, very little wear, even after those extreme conditions. And that whole time, they protected him against moisture uptake, against high abrasion, and gave him, moderate friction coefficient. So really high performance product.
Great. Let's move on to talking about some backcountry uses with regards to backcountry handwear needs, and ask you to share which outdoor research gloves or mittens you feel would be good choices to fill the needs.
Sure.
It's understood that you'll have to give somewhat generalizations here since there are so many variables to consider, but let's start with cold weather, perhaps like 20 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, sitting in camp, maybe ice fishing or something sedentary like that, and maybe windy, perhaps even a chance of getting them wet.
Yeah, I'd probably break that down depending on the user and their experience level and just general preference. Probably sort of break that down into a couple of different choices. One that comes to mind is the Alpi glove. So the Alpi glove offers you 100% synthetic construction, so it's that Alpi grip palm, very, very durable, low moisture uptake. It's a Gore-Tex construction, so the glove itself is going to be completely waterproof. It has all synthetic insulations, so you don't have to worry if you take on some moisture about getting cold. It uses a combination of Primaloft and our own proprietary Moonlight pile, both of which are designed to keep you warm when wet. It has a modular component, a removable liner that has Primaloft as well. So you Primaloft in the shell, so you can use the shell by itself. It has a removable liner that's a nylon-lined Primaloft product that you can also use by itself. And then for the extreme cold conditions, you can put those two together. So they really kind of afford you a nice range of versatility. Another approach might be to take something like our Arete glove. And the Arete glove is a lighter insulation product, but you could pair that with a liner glove. It comes with a kind of what I would call midweight liner glove. You could pair it with a heavier weight liner glove, something like our PL400 glove. And then you get a lot of the same benefits that you do out of the Alpi, with a little bit less warmth, more for somebody who knows that their hands are going to run a little bit warmer, or really is focused on as much dexterity as they can get. And probably the third option, if we're thinking about mitts, that I would recommend is something like our mitts, waterproof with our Ventia waterproof breathable insert. Also modular construction, so you pull out a heavy fleeced mitt, and that fleeced mitt actually is a flip top construction. So if you really need to get down to using your bare fingers for a moment, as you may in a fishing environment, you can pull the liners out of the shells, flip them open, and you're down to bare fingers, or obviously close the whole thing up, put one inside the other, and you have a nice warm package.
Okay, do each of those options, the Alpi glove, the Arete glove, the Meteor mitt, do they come in both men and women's versions?
Actually, the Alpi glove and the Meteor are unisex, and so they come in a slightly broader size range. The Arete glove does come in a men's version as well as a women's version.
What's the general weight of these gloves?
So the total weight of the Alpi glove is going to weigh in at almost 10 and a half ounces. So it's a pretty robust package there. The men's Arete glove is a little bit heavier than the women's. It's going to be 7.5 ounces, and then the Meteor mitt is going to be overall it's going to be 9.2 ounces. And then if you chose to pair the Arete, as I mentioned earlier, with the PL400 glove, that would actually add another 3 ounces. So let's say you didn't pair the Arete with that product, if you wanted to kind of mix and match, you would end up with all three systems being approximately the same weight.
So those PL400s, those are a thicker fleece weight?
Those are double layered fleece glove liner, exactly. So again, the Arete comes with what I would call a 100 weight fleece, and the PL400s are a 400 weight fleece. So it's about 4 times heavier. So you get just a little bit more versatility if you want to pack those in. Then you end up with 2 sets of liners and 1 shell. So a really nice range of options there.
While we're on the topic of cold, let me take this a little bit further and ask, which glove or system will keep hands warm at, say, minus 40 degrees?
Yeah, minus 40, which is really when you're talking about minus 40, you're talking, top of Everest type conditions. I would recommend comfortably, happily, are really what I would consider to be kind of the pinnacle product of our handwear collection. And when you look at pictures of people summiting Everest, the majority of people you see on the top of Everest are actually wearing the OR Alpi mitts. They are a really robust product, so they're fully seam-taped Gore-Tex shell, so waterproof construction. The shell has 5-ounce Primaloft insulation. The liner has a 10-ounce Primaloft insulation, so a very, very thick package, what we would consider to be sort of a 15-ounce package there, which is incredibly warm. And then on the palm side of both shell and removable liner, we use our Moonlight pile, so it gives you some dexterity. I mean, it's not a lot because it's a pretty big puffy mitt, but still some. And together that package is great for, the highest altitude, coldest pursuits on Earth.
Yeah, we don't always have to go all the way to Everest to get minus 40 either, do we?
That's
Sometimes
true.
it's northern Minnesota, maybe, North Dakota, some of those places in the winter.
Absolutely.
Definitely experienced cold weather there. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about gloves for bushwhacking, handling firewood, I guess what I would call sort of a utility glove. So in both cold and warm situations, if you know you're going to need something a little bit more durable for handling, like I said, firewood or twigs, breaking branches, bushwhacking, that sort of thing, what would you recommend?
We have a really nice sort of, I guess I would call it a collection within a collection of gloves that we capture in our Ascent line. And those gloves consist of our Extrovert glove, our Storm Tracker glove, our Gripper glove, and our Vert glove. And I give those to you in that order because roughly they line up with warmth levels. None of these would be gloves that I would recommend for extreme cold weather at rest, but when you're moving, whether bushwhacking or splitting wood, up and with some moderate level activity, these are going to offer a tremendous amount of versatility. So the Extrovert is a outer shell on the back of hand, and then completely lined with a thick, lofty wool fabric on the inside. So that's going to give you a lot of moisture management, really nice amount of warmth, but the way we engineered the glove gives you a lot of dexterity and tactility, so you almost never need to take it off. Next on that list that I mentioned is a Storm Tracker. That uses a Gore wind stopper back of hand, so that's going to, when you're dealing with maybe a little bit wetter condition, but you still want warmth and tactility, that's going to be a great product. So it's going to block the wind at 100%. It's going to be very, very highly water resistant, and because it's fleece back, it's going to give you a nice degree of warmth. And both the Extrovert and the Storm Tracker come in men's and women's. The next one I would suggest is our Gripper glove. The Gripper glove is probably at this point 20-year-old classic for outdoor research. It is our most popular glove, has been for many, many years. And the Gripper glove is a double layer fleece fabric with a Gore wind stopper in between. So it's going to block the wind at 100%. Double layers of fleece on the outside and the inside means a nice amount of warmth. Has a slightly reinforced synthetic palm, not for sort of super high wear activities, but generally for kind of mid-duty handling. It's going to be a great product and afford you that warmth, and also available in men's and women's. And then last on the list that I mentioned are the Vert gloves. Those are really not designed for extreme cold. Those are more utility kind of work glove oriented. They have a lightweight brushed interior, but if you're somebody who runs hot or somebody who's involved in a fairly aerobic activity, they give you a nice leather palm, durable stretch fabric over the back of the hand, and just a little bit of treat to preserve a little bit of warmth. Really going to allow you to have tactility, dexterity, and very high level of functionality in a pretty broad range of conditions.
Okay, and out of the Extrovert, Storm Tracker, and Gripper, which of these would you say is the most popular?
With a popular glove, men's and women's gripper gloves, in the entire collection of gloves that we sell. The Extrovert and the Storm Tracker are styles that we've introduced in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, and both of those have actually moved up in their sales volume pretty quickly due to, their very, very high level of functionality as well. So that we see those as up-and-coming classics in the AOR collection.
Would you say that these in the Ascent line here, in terms of weight, are about 2/3 of the weight of the ones that we went over for cold weather?
Yeah, so the Extrovert glove is about 5.5 ounces in the men's product. The Storm Tracker is about 4 ounces, Gripper 3.3. So, yeah, probably half to a third would be a fair statement.
Yeah, it's great weight for the utility that they're offering.
Yeah, it's exceptional, especially when you look at that Extrovert, which really is the warmest of that bunch. That wool lining is just outstanding. Very, very comfortable, very, very warm.
Let's move on to another group here. What about a lightweight hiking glove for cold, wet, maybe even dry, but chilly weather? Just something for those people that want some kind of liner glove or holding on to some trekking poles. Maybe it's even a summer evening at altitude. They're out on an exposed ridge or something. It's a little windy and chilly.
Yeah, I'd probably kind of bridge our last conversation into this one and start with the Gripper because it is kind of a liner glove / work glove. So that would be a great choice to start with. But beyond that, we have a number of other really nice choices as well. One that we do is the Omni glove, and that product is Polartec Wind Pro fabric. And so it's very, very highly wind resistant and water shedding. It's not windproof. So it gives you a lot of breathability. So if you're moving, it's going to breathe really nicely. And it's got a very, very durable face on the fleece. So not really for wood handling level of durability, but kind of general moving around, holding onto poles. For all of that type of use, it's going to be outstanding. And it has a nice grip on the palm. One feature I love on that glove is it's a glow-in-the-dark product. So that they actually make it pretty easy to find the gloves in the dark. And even if you light them up with your headlamp and then turn off your headlamp, they radiate enough light that within, say if you're about 4 or 5 inches from something, you can see if you're reaching for a water bottle or something like that. The next one I would look to for that type of use would be our backstop glove. That's a unique construction. It's windstopper, back of hand, and then fleece on the palm. And so that combination gives you a really nice blend of windproof back, water shedding, but then a very, very high degree of breathability and tactility through the palm. So nice product there. And then a couple others I would reference would probably be our flurry gloves, which are a knit, like a rag wool, sweater knit wool type glove. But blended, on the outside it's wool. On the inside it's actually a soft fleece. So you get the exterior benefits of wool, but against your skin you don't get any of the itch. You get a nice soft polar fleece right against your skin. And then from there we have a very, very long list of liners, all of which would fit the bill. But probably if I had to make recommendations, the ones I just mentioned would be really by far the best.
Okay, and so for the Omni, backstop, flurry, those types of gloves, are these like in the 3 ounce range?
Yeah, about 3 ounces across the board. The Omni's 2.5, backstop 2.5, flurry 2.5. So yeah, so I was guessing a little high.
Okay, and you also have some that even weigh less than that.
Oh, most definitely. Our lightest glove that we make is the PL base, which weighs in at 1.5 ounces.
Okay, so you got something for everybody across the whole spectrum, essentially from an ounce to a pound.
Yeah, that's right. That would be a great way to put it. And it really depends on the needs. We once got a review on our Alpi Mitt, which I referenced earlier. That Alpi Mitt product is $200. I mean, it's not an inexpensive product, but the reviewer said at $20 a finger, it's a pretty good investment. You saw your fingers.
Well, I know from experience just getting out with some of the lightweight liners that I've used in the wind, maybe a piece of gear in camp, and then I started getting holes in these ultralight gloves, and then I've also been out in bitter cold and didn't have a thick enough glove before, so I know what that's like. And it really is about having the right tool for the job. And it depends on what people are doing out there. If they're spending a lot of hours just moving, hiking, or snowshoeing continuously, of course their furnace is burning and they're going to be able to take their gloves off maybe or wear lesser at times. But when you stop and it's bitter cold outside, you definitely need the insulation there if you're exposed.
Absolutely. No question.
All right, let's move on to fit. How should gloves actually fit your hands? And if you don't mind also, if you could tell us how should one measure his or her hands to get the proper size?
Well, fit is definitely an interesting question with regard to gloves. What we find is that hands vary pretty broadly in proportion, and where you see that biggest difference is between men's and women. So buying the correct gender glove is definitely an important thing, and we and many of our competitors in the glove space proportion men's gloves differently from women's gloves. So I would certainly recommend that people start with gender-specific gloves. From that point, I think it's a matter of trial and error. Some people prefer a tighter-fitting glove, and if your needs around tactility are very, very high, I would recommend go to a smaller glove, and particularly when we're talking about liner gloves. If warmth is your main concern, make sure that glove is not too constricting, because obviously that constriction will reduce a large part of the benefit of an insulated glove. And then for more specifics, one thing I'd recommend is on the Outdoor Research website. On every single glove we have a sizing chart, and you can just click on that tab and it gives you measurement numbers depending on the style of the glove, and also just a couple of quick drawings that help you measure your hand and determine exactly which size is going to be best for you.
For sizing, you're just measuring around the widest part of your palm, and then another measurement with the base
so
of your
your
hand.
palm basically at the level of your knuckles. Your your most prominent knuckles, and then the length of your hand from the tip of the longest finger to the bend that forms in your wrist, the first bend or fold in the skin that forms, and that's going to give you length.
Okay. Now, I noticed that you mentioned being able to put thicker liner gloves for varied degrees of cold activity into mitts. So when people are getting mitts, they want to make sure that they're primarily making the liner gloves fit.
Correct. I mean, people want to make sure, and in a modular glove, there's definitely always a choice to be made. Are you going to be using the system more as a system, or are you going to be using the individual elements more as individual elements? My recommendation is that make sure the system fits as a system. And the reason I say that is because I think most people are using the shell and liner together, or they're using the liner by itself. So if the whole system fits, what you're ensuring is that sort of 2 out of the 3 possible use scenarios for a system like that are going to be addressed. The shell-liner combination, which is your warmest and most important, and also your liner by itself, which is likely how you're going to use it if you're in a cold environment. Take off the shell, use your hand in the liner for a minute, and then put the whole thing back together. Certainly, that leaves the shell itself a little bit larger than is desirable, but I think that's an appropriate compromise to get that versatility of the system.
I agree. Yeah, that's a great approach. All right, let's talk a little bit about care. I know it's not a good idea to dry certain wet shoes near a fire because it could compromise the adhesives. Are there any precautions, other than don't get them too close to the fire, that you're aware of with any of the outdoor research handwear?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges you're going to have is that these are predominantly synthetic materials. So synthetic materials have pretty low melt and ignition points, and probably the worst on that would be polyester. Polyester melts at about time. Polyester fleeces are very fibrous, so they have kind of a lot of little candle wicks sticking out of them. So for the most part, what we would recommend is don't ever put a fleece glove anywhere near a fire, because fleece is notorious for catching on fire and catching on fire quickly, and then it'll shrink wrap itself to your body if your hands are in it. But fleece is very notorious. As for shell gloves, I think it's just a common sense discussion. Keep them at an appropriate distance. Don't ever let them get too hot, or you will melt and compromise the materials. And really, one of the benefits of a modular system is you can bring extra liners if you're out for multi-day activity. So that helps preserve warmth even if certain components get damp. And to carry, a couple ounces for an extra pair of liners is good, cheap insurance. And then the other thing you can do with a modular product is take them apart and put them inside your sleeping bag. They tend to dry most, if not all the way, overnight. And that modularity means, you're taking layers apart, and each piece can dry on its own pretty effectively.
What do you recommend for drying gloves when they're brought home wet? Low heat dryer or ambient room drying?
Actually all of our products can be machine washed, tumble dried. You will, over time, as dryers do with any garment, washers and dryers do have a tendency to reduce the overall lifespan of, whether it be a pair of socks or a pair of gloves. But you can machine wash, tumble dry. What I like to do actually is just make sure they're nice and open and just hang them up. They generally, in a, say, normal room temperature, normal humidity environment, they'll be dry in 24 hours. It's usually not that big of a deal. And certainly if it is modular, separate those layers.
Definitely, and they'll last a little bit longer over time.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, this has been very informative. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, I just think these are great series of questions you asked, and I appreciate, the opportunity around these types of handwear facilities. I think it's a great service that you do.
Well, thank you very much, and Ami, it's been great talking with you. I'll be sure to put a special link to the Outdoor Research website on the Practical Backpacking Podcast site.
Excellent. Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. The Practical Backpacking Podcast is financially supported by its host and a few kind listeners. If you enjoyed